Are you seeking empowerment and growth in your life's journey? Have you felt stuck or unsure about your path, yearning for fulfillment and creativity? Once struggling with insecurities and self-doubt, Davidson Hung understands the challenges of feeling lost and unfulfilled. Through his own experiences, travels, and learnings, he's developed a system to empower individuals seeking joy and abundance in their lives. Today, he'll discuss strategies to break free from scarcity mindsets, transform your career, and discover the power of mentorship through LinkedIn. He'll share inspiring tales of personal achievements and growth, shedding light on the resources available to help you thrive. Davidson, thanks for coming on. This is awesome. I know we met, I don't know, it's probably been a month or two now at a chamber event, right? And you were just kind of an awesome guy. I had no idea like what your depth was, frankly, at the time, other than the fact that you were a nice guy. And several people already knew you, which kind of, because I'm pretty well known in the chamber. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I know Davidson. He's a great guy. He's a great guy. He does this YouTube thingy. And I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. So I go to YouTube and I go, oh, he's got a pretty good video. And then I look up and I go, wow, 700 and some odd thousand followers. That's pretty good. I guess I'm not the only one that's watched one of your videos, apparently. So that's pretty cool. So tell us a little bit about, like, I mean, because a lot of people have done it, but most of us have like four followers, 7 followers, 12. My daughter's really thrilled. She got to 70 recently on,
nice.
You know,
That's
she just
good.
started a week or two ago, but she's like, oh, I got 70. That's awesome.
That's pretty good.
But, you know, you're a little bit further along, let's just say,
a couple days further,
Yeah. So kind of tell us like what inspired you to start doing this in the first place. I know you have a story there, and then like how you kind of got it going, I guess, what your secret is.
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of it is just to save time because people would ask me the same freaking questions every single time. It would be, hey, Davidson, like, how do you build a LinkedIn following, right? You have 18,000 like people, like, teach me LinkedIn, right? Because I worked at LinkedIn, so that helped me gain confidence. I wrote a lot of Reddit posts, and some of them went viral, so that gave me the confidence, like, oh, people actually like my stuff, huh? Because it's interesting, right? It's like what the chicken or the egg, what comes first? Is it like I just put myself out there and then people, or is it that I actually have value, right? It's hard to say.
Right.
And so people kept asking me, like I would probably in the last 10 years, I've gotten 1,000 people ask like the same 15 questions, right? So I started making videos on it. It would be, hey, can you help me with my resume? How do you ask for introductions into companies? And then a lot of interview tips like, hey, like how do you give a good story that resonate, or how do you do research on interview, like the hiring manager, and how do you write thank you notes and stuff like that. So I just kept doing a video and another video. And then anytime someone asks me like any question now, I'll just make a video about it. Cause I'm like, oh, okay, this is the 5th time someone asked me the same exact thing.
Oh.
So
that's smart. I mean, you mentioned Reddit. I'm sure you're not the only one to publish on Reddit. What do you think was the difference between just publishing on Reddit and making it go viral? Because obviously there were some qualities to that post. Any common thread to the ones that are, because I know I hear this all the time, like post, and all of a sudden you never really know which one is my understand. But when you look back, any qualities that you noticed in the ones that are like, hey, that was really
that's a good
one.
Question. So I think there's 4 common threads for virality. One is like vulnerability is like, I would say my secret sauce, like, because I think everyone has different things, right? Some people are like, they're clearly the expert and they just have so much wisdom. I'm still young, so I think people think I don't have wisdom, but
clearly you do.
I guess so, enough that people are following me.
Absolutely.
So I think vulnerability is really important, and I'm also really good at like tagging a lot of people. So, like let's say I write a LinkedIn post. In that post, I might tag like 30 people. Like, let's say it's like the end of the year and I want to reflect on 2023. I'm like, all right, here are 123 ways or people I would like to acknowledge for like making this year amazing, right? And then sometimes I'll even tag like Tony Robbins and like other influencers.
Right.
And then of course like people follow them, so then that helps.
And he calls you and says, Davidson, man, thanks for tagging me. I needed this visibility, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And sometimes they're probably like these guys, like they're just, but if it's genuine, if it's authentic, people like that. And then so fame, right? They call it fame jacking. That's the term.
Sure.
Right. And then like gratitude and appreciation does pretty well for me. I think everyone's a little bit different. So like my secret sauce is like, I'll do like 30, some days I'll just like acknowledge 30 people. Like, let's say I went to a networking event and I met like 10 people. I'd be like, hey, I learned this from Phil. I learned this from Kurt. Like, you know, it's so inspiring. And I'm doing a little bit less of that because I think I was like over indexing too much on that. And it was like very time consuming. But now I'm teaching my team how to do it for me. So then it's like a little bit more scalable.
So when you go in, you do the video, then you say, hey, take the content and say, well, here's the people I mentioned. And they go back and just tag the ones in there. And so that helps to...
Or I'll train them, like at like the copywriter that I just hired. He's like, hey, like, what is your template, right? So I'll give them like, okay, this is like how I go about like my hero's journey, right? First, I talk about how I was broke, poor, overweight, and then I talk about how I was addicted to drugs and, you know, how I was depressed, and I took this Tony Robbins course, and then this is, you know, so when I teach them that, then they can, all the articles they write for me will be in that same format, but will be like slightly nuanced.
I mean, you could put everything into that frame.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
if you think about
amazing,
it,
actually.
Yeah, every YouTube video, every viral video always has like the similar, like it's like the same format. It's just they look different. Maybe they're a female instead of a, you know, or they're Asian or they're Indian, right? So, but if you really like dissect like all the top YouTube videos, it's always like the same exact format.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. But obviously, you have slightly different. You have different content, right? So you want to.
Yeah, it's just packaged a little bit differently. But if you really look back at it, it's always the same thing. It's like, hey, like I hit this like obstacle, right? Or like I had this like disempowering belief, which in my case was like, oh, I'm a short Asian dude and I'm not like a tall 6'7" quarterback looking white dude. So like that was like my, so I was like, oh, I could never be like a leader.
That would just be weird though. it's like, okay. It'd be very different.
Yeah, very different, right?
Yeah.
But then I'm attracting that type of audience too, right? So
Okay.
everyone who reaches out to me that's like, oh my God, like your content really vibe with me, are like usually like insecure people that didn't have parents growing up, people that grew up with a lot of trauma, that maybe they were like abused or whatever. And then, so it's interesting. So, but I'm saying, if you think about it, the same exact thing as what every other YouTuber is saying. It's just because I look a certain way, or maybe mine's like a little bit more focused on like the mental health aspect. And some people are like, hey, you know, I was a model, but you know, the modeling industry was like brutal, right? Because they would judge us and, you know, they would like criticize us, but it's like almost the same exact thing. Like if you really dissect it. So I took a lot of time to like study all these things, because I was like, okay, like why is this post getting 100 views or 100 comments versus this vote only got 15 comments, right? And then I saw like, okay, there's a common theme here.
Okay, now that's with your videos or with other people's as well?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, because you have to like study the market, right? So like I'll look at, okay, what are other Asian influencers that are life coachy type of topics doing, and then I'll see like, oh, okay, so they have a similar. But then I would say I'm a bit more vulnerable and a bit more like approachable, where some of these gurus are like more like I'm the expert and like I'm a boss, and like more of like projecting more of that self-confidence. Whereas like I would say my secret sauce is more like I'm just really vulnerable, and most people don't like cry on camera like in front of like 18,000 LinkedIn followers, right? So I would say like that was what made me kind of go viral versus like other people that maybe are getting like 50 comments, you know, versus like 300 comments, for instance.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess they talk about your voice, right? You find your voice and like who you are and how you actually share your experiences with others. And then you kind of attract people that have similar backgrounds. You have a lot of things that have occurred. So I can see where there's a lot of areas where you could connect with people, right? You got the, you know, the issue like growing up, you know, the parents, no parents growing up, and then, you know, the addiction issue, the mental health issues. I mean, that's a lot of issues in society that we're all really trying to solve. You know, it's a tough area to do. And, you know, I just think that's amazing. And you pointed out something, I actually saw something like Mr. Beast, which I guess you would know about, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's a biggie.
He's like everyone always tries to study him, and he's doing it at a level that's like beyond, I would say, like the amount of, I think he spends like 300 hours like just thinking about ideas, right?
But he spent, my understanding is he spent about 2 years studying YouTube before he actually made his first video.
Yeah,
which
insane.
People are like, oh, you just go on YouTube, you start making videos, and so I hear a couple things. One, I mean, you got to, in order to be good, you have to be bad. In order to be bad, you have to try, right? So the idea is just get out and do these things. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's, you know, dating or, you know, a business or employment, whatever it is, you need to kind of get out there and start, right? which I find is interesting. But you also have to study. You have to become an expert, right? You can't just like, it doesn't, you're just not going to absorb it like a sponge without going out and looking, for what is actually working, right? And how you transition that to yourself, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think the first 100 videos will suck no matter how good you are, just because like YouTube, like you said, it's like so thumbnail focused. It's so people have just very short attention spans on YouTube. So I think it's the most brutal out of all the social media platforms, but it's also the most lucrative as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finance. I'm here with Davidson Hung, and this is just awesome because I love how successful you've been. And what's interesting, you look pretty young to me, and you said you've been doing this for 10 years, which I think is awesome. So I think one of the things that probably know Russell Brunson. He talks about every time I'm going out there trying to provide information, I'm always thinking about. He always talks about 12-year-old Russell, right? So you have to go back and think about the expertise that you have now that you take for granted that you didn't know back when you were younger. And you're going, and you have a relatively, short career, so to speak, but you've learned a lot during that period of time. And anybody who's like 5 or 10 years behind you can learn from what you've figured out. And then you talked about like your template, right? Like how you frame things and what you've learned from that. Can you kind of walk us through that process? Because I think a lot of people think you just go out and just make content and people are going to watch you and all that, but there's an art to it, but there's definitely a science, and you have to really learn and nail that science down to make it all kind of work the way you see like a Mr. Beast or a Russell Brunson or yourself like come together, right?
I love how I was in the same sentence as those two. That
awesome?
that just made my day. Yeah, copywriting is such a valuable skill, and I think it's like the hardest skill to master, right? And you would think being in professional B2B sales, I would have mastered it, but even in B2B sales, right, it's still not hooky enough, right? It's like very marketing templated. It's like product marketing, it's very fluffy. I learned this the hard way because the first 400 videos like weren't getting that many views, like maybe 120 to like 300 views on average, right? Which, in the grand scheme of
400, how many have you made? That's a lot.
Yeah, I made 600 videos.
Oh, wow.
Already.
I didn't realize it was that many. I knew it was a lot. I didn't know it was 600. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and now looking back and like, man, if I just focused like 50% of my energy just on the first minute, like it would have had a, and I think one of the advantages I had, because Ali Abdaal always talks about your unfair advantage, right? To your point. So I realized when I worked at LinkedIn, I was getting a lot more visibility, right? Because people always want to learn like, hey, what is it like working at LinkedIn? Because it's such a competitive company and everyone wants to work there, or at least in tech. I had 114 other people that I competed against to get the job at LinkedIn.
Wow, I didn't realize that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy how many people want to work there. But it was like, I can write the dumbest thing and it went viral. And like a lot of, because everyone's just like, oh, this guy works at LinkedIn. That's
true celebrity status. We can pretty much say anything and people are like, oh my gosh, look what he said.
And that's how I felt like it was at LinkedIn. Because I would say objectively, my content's a lot better the last 2 years. But just because I worked at LinkedIn, like everything I wrote had, because LinkedIn at that time had 14,000 employees. So
we have an implied expertise.
Yeah.
Because you're connected to an organization that has a lot of expertise.
Right.
So they just assume that you know what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. And so I think like knowing that, it's like, oh, I would have used that more to my advantage.
Okay.
I think I would have been like doing like, hey, if you want to get viral on LinkedIn, these are the steps you would take. But I just took it for granted because like it's almost like a false ego boost where I was just like, huh. Like, and then once I left LinkedIn, a lot of the stuff wasn't going as viral, and I was like, oh man, am I a crappier writer now? It's like, no, actually I've gotten better, but I just didn't have the clout of working at LinkedIn versus like I was working for like a small tech startup that was like Series C.
Right. Okay.
So that's interesting. Where like just being able to play to those advantages helps out a lot.
Maybe touch a little bit on LinkedIn since you have so much expertise, because this is one of these things where in business. I remember when I first, somebody said, are you LinkedIn or something? I forget the term. I think they said, are you LinkedIn? I go, I don't know. Is it like, can I get a pill for that? Or I mean, do I need to see the doctor? Because when I first heard it, I'm like, I didn't even know what it was, frankly, because nobody was on LinkedIn, really.
Sure.
I mean, to speak of.
Yeah, it's relatively
This
new.
is years ago, obviously.
Yeah.
And then I go, oh, well, get on LinkedIn. I go, okay, great. I got on LinkedIn. So I started linking all these people together. And I'm like, okay, I got all these people. Now what? Right? And to me, it's kind of like, it's one of these things where you have to be on LinkedIn. You're supposed to be on there, and I'm posting some content. I'm doing things like that. But I know there's a whole nother level, which obviously you've kind of entered into. Like, how do you actually like get real engagement? Any kind of quick tips on, like, you know, because there's a lot of business owners on LinkedIn that are underutilizing it or utilizing it the wrong way. Like they're spamming you like, oh, hi, so I reviewed your profile and I think we should work together. Let's set up a time to call. Here's my Calendly link.
So
and we're like, first of all, you didn't use my name. Secondly, you're the third boilerplate exact same verbiage that I just got from you, in the last hour, right?
That's a good question. So how I figured out how to use LinkedIn was like I was fundraising for a lot of nonprofits. So we were building schools in Africa and then helping orphans in Vietnam. And that was like the first taste of LinkedIn where I was like, huh. So for context, like every person I've met, like even just once at a networking event, like even if we had like a 30-second conversation, I would just add them on LinkedIn immediately, right? So that's like my first advice. Some people, they pick and choose who they add. I'm like, no, just add everyone, because you just never know, right? Like one of my high school friends, like she took over as a president of this like huge manufacturing company, and when I'm in high school, I'm not thinking like, oh, how can I leverage? Right. Like, how am I going to leverage that to make millions, right?
Yep.
But it's just like, you just never know. So that's my first advice. The second one is, I think people are afraid to be vulnerable, like really put themselves out there. Like people still think, oh, LinkedIn is this professional, like I have to like wear my suit. But actually, like people crave that authenticity because it is one of those platforms where people are a little bit still guarded. So all of my posts that did really, really well, that got like thousands and thousands of engagements, were the ones where I was just pouring my heart out. And I was just like, hey guys, like I just got let go from this job and I'm like really struggling. And like, if anyone can help me, like let me know. And then I would have like 100 people call me.
Wow.
Like, I mean, it wasn't like overnight, but it was like over the course of a week. Like, and then my phone was blowing up. I was like, holy crap, like this is the power of LinkedIn. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Is another, because every time I've had like a struggle, like I'm like, hey guys, like I'm actually like struggling with, my identity or whatever, like any vulnerable topic, there would be like a lot of people that, and they don't always write comments, but they'll send me DMs like on LinkedIn, or they'll like straight up just call me. And the community is like really strong on LinkedIn, right? Because it's like, I would say more trustworthy still compared to some of the other platforms.
Right.
And I think, business owners aren't using it correctly because like they'll just spam like marketing material, right? It's like storytelling. It's like maybe a client, like you had a really good interaction with a client and more like you're promoting your client instead, right? Instead of doing your own thing. And then people would see that and they'll be like, oh, okay, like this person actually cares about their clients instead of like the generic marketing stuff that everyone else does. That's I would say the number one thing that people misuse LinkedIn for is, and then the recommendations helped a lot as well. I have 76 LinkedIn recommendations, and that is like has been super helpful because anytime I reach out to a client, they're like, dude, like how do you even have that many? Like you must be but then it's bad because then people sometimes like have expectations. They're like, you must be like incredible because you have 70 something.
So how do you solicit for these recommendations?
That's a good question. Usually, like if I'm giving like free advice, right, I'd be like, hey, like, I'm more than happy to help you. But, if this is valuable, like, would you be open to writing a recommendation for me? They're like, yeah, of course. And then they usually do. But it's like usually the first thing I say to them. Or like if it's like a really good session, I'll ask them afterwards.
Okay, I never really think about LinkedIn too often. I know things like, Google reviews, things like that people talk about, and a lot of companies don't use that properly. But but I think the smart part is it's part of your framing, right? Like you're part of your frame, like, okay, here's the things that I have to do. And I think that's good because I thought the one thing I heard of the storytelling, which I thought was very interesting, was a lot of times people talk about their own story, but when you're talking about your clients or your customers' stories,
exactly.
That definitely shows empathy, and it also shows, to me, it's showing like who you care about and who you serve.
Yeah,
and you go, hey,
the FOMO too.
If those are somebody that I can identify with, then that might be a vendor that would also understand me.
Yeah,
right. If you kind of understand who they're talking about, they're like, oh, we're kind of in that same affinity group, so to speak. They have similar issues and similar problems to what I have.
Yeah,
and that vendor actually solved it.
Yeah.
So now you kind of take away and you get a little more of a social like credibility kind of mark there, don't you?
Humans are strange, right? Where there's a bit of like FOMO. So sometimes like I'll host like my monthly happy hours in New York City, and then people will just see it, and people I haven't spoken with in like months, right? But they'll see like other accountants, like partners of accounting firms that I work with, and then I'll post and tag them, and then like people will reach out and be like, oh, I didn't know you were, like other accounting firms would be like, hey, sorry, I wasn't able to make it. Like, so it's just good because like they'll reach out to me proactively because they're just like, I kind of want to know what happened. Like, why, what are you doing with, that partner at Citron Cooperman or whatever, right? So it is a bit of that FOMO. And then when you're highlighting your client success, like maybe I worked with like Better Buzz Coffee, right? And I'll tag the head of HR. Well, I have other coffee clients that I'm trying to get in the door with, and they see that and they're just like, huh, like tell me more. Like I saw that you tag Amalia, like, oh, I actually went to college with her, or I met her at a conference, and then they'll like bring it up themselves. So it's just like one of those weird things that like psychology wise, people are always like, yeah, man, am I missing out? Like, what does Davidson know that I don't know, right? And then they'll reach out sometimes. So it is interesting how all that stuff works.
Well, that's really awesome. We're going to take another quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I am here with Davidson Hung, and we're talking about like really like he's a YouTube like phenomenon, so to speak. He's doing really well. Worked at LinkedIn for a while, and I guess we'll go in maybe some more tips about that. I think that's something that's very much underutilized and misunderstood, and a lot of us in business are probably not using it correctly. And so maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. So you talked about tagging people, putting content, doing stories that are client or customer centric, like telling their stories and publishing those, which I think is really smart.
Yeah.
I know sometimes we'll go to an event and we'll post some photos, but I think posting actual a little bit of content, it sounds like is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then put it up on there, right? So any other kind of ideas along the LinkedIn avenue that maybe we should all be following? And what about like when you message somebody?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, rarely do I get, I mean, maybe 1 in 100 do I actually go, oh, that's an actual message, right? If it's from somebody I don't know.
That's a really good question. Oh, I love this topic because to your point, people are, I hate it because people are butchering LinkedIn right now, and it could be used in such a better way.
Right.
So I've been lucky where some of my best friends now are people who like just did a crap ton of research on me.
Okay.
Listened to my podcast episodes and like really like wrote like a super thoughtful message. And then we became best friends because I'm like, man, this person like listened to 5 episodes. He dissected his learnings and like shared about like his takeaways. But you can use that same format to find clients, right? So being in sales, like I'll listen to people's like podcast interviews or their articles that they write, and I'll usually write my takeaways like, hey, I really enjoyed like this review that you did or whatever it is, right? Like just dissecting it. And so the format that I go, it's usually one is like a compliment, right? It's like some acknowledgement, like, hey, I really get that. Like maybe it's like a CHRO. I really get that you you really love your team, right? It's evident by like the careful words that you use, the thoughtfulness of the acknowledgements, and you just seem, your energy seems like really positive, and like, it was inspiring to see that level of dedication to your team members, right? And like, who's not gonna like that, right? At least like they'll write back saying like, no, thank you, or something, right? So the first one's acknowledgement. The second one is, like I would say like go above and beyond. So what I do is I'll look at like one of their recommendations, like maybe someone like one of their former employees, like it's like, hey, Catherine's a really good boss. Like this is what I learned from her, and like without her, like I wouldn't be anywhere I was, right? So I would say like, man, like it seems like Catherine, based on what I read, like Catherine like really respects you as a leader, and that's actually one of the reasons why I'm reaching out to you, right? Because like I'm helping Fortune 500 companies build their high potential programs for women that want to break into the C-suite, right? And then that's usually where I tie in like what's the reason why I'm reaching out. But I think like the best way to use LinkedIn is the second degree connections, right? So I remember there was a big bank up in North Jersey that had around 300 employees, and I asked one of my friends that I go hiking with. There's a hiking group that we do once a month hiking for, I think like it's been like 12 years now. And I saw that he was connected, and I was like, hey, like, how do you know Mike? He's like, oh, we go to the same racket club. I'm like, oh, interesting. Would you be open to making an introduction for me? So I pick up the phone and I call him, and I was like, I'll ghostwrite everything for you. So all you have to do is literally just copy and paste it into a message, so you don't have to think. And then he's like, sure, that makes my life a lot easier. And then people don't follow up because they're inherently busy. Like, just send them a voice note. Be like, hey, I'm thinking, like, just thinking of you. Just send you friendly reminder. Because some people do forget, right? I think we all make the mistake of not following up because they were like, oh, maybe he doesn't want to help me. But it's like, no, he just forgot. Like, he has a billion other things. So I think people don't follow up enough. But as long as the follow up is like thoughtful, right? It can't just be like, hey, just pinging you like for no reason. Like, if you're, maybe it's like you do like you spend a 1.5 minute looking at their LinkedIn. It's like, hey, I really liked your article. So you don't even have to say like, hey, can you like follow up with that introduction? But you just saying like, oh, that really, it's like, oh yeah, okay, Davidson's top of mind. Like, let me just finish that, right? And that's like, I think the best use case for LinkedIn, because I've gotten so many introductions of really, really high-end clients just through that method alone. Yeah,
what I'm hearing here is you need to analyze and kind of enter their world, not ask them to enter your world.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I've heard this before, but I think most of us, if you really want to connect with a high-value client on LinkedIn, and as you know, many people on LinkedIn are very high value.
Yeah.
You can't be like sending them some generic message. Why not spend 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is, to minimum analyze their LinkedIn profile, look at some of the articles, because they might actually, as you know, you'll see the other channels they're on. You can search them. They have a YouTube channel, they have
Twitter,
a whatever, and say, oh, Twitter, whatever it is, and say, oh, and actually connect to something that they care about, right? If they're posting or writing about it, that's something they care about. And if there's a connection and you have a commonality, they're gonna respond naturally, because like, oh yeah, I just wrote that article last week about such and such. And you're actually adding comments to whatever that conversation is.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, hey, okay. That's a conversation they already want to have, obviously, right?
And this is a bit riskier, but you could even like challenge their article a little bit, right? Because it just shows like a bit more executive presence. So you could be like, hey, I agreed with X, Y, Z. So like maybe points 1, 2, and 3, and you list them. But have you ever considered this point of view? And then they're like, oh, who's this guy?
There you go.
And that separates you as well. Just like adding value through like something that gets them to think a little bit, like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. Like, that's it. Or like say like, hey, like.
So don't be a yes man. Actually, be a peer. That sounds like being a peer.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, a peer is going to challenge you on a concept. Even just please explain this. How did you come to that conclusion? I'm not seeing your point of view. Here's what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah.
And that way, they actually know you're not just reading it, you're actually thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah. Or you just plant like just a little bit of uncertainty where they're like, all right, I got to take a meeting with this guy.
Right. Because they have a different point of view, and maybe I can learn something that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
Because if they're already experts, they already know a lot. And if you're actually adding some value to they're like, oh, okay, this is somebody I might actually be able to, I may learn from this person.
Exactly.
As well. So that's pretty cool. I never really thought of that, but that's it makes a lot of sense when you kind of walk through the process. So so you worked for LinkedIn a long time, and so any other recommendation on LinkedIn that you can think of? Those are all pretty good, I have to say.
Yeah. I think there's this new feature that's like it's like they have AI generated prompts, and they based on your expertise. So for me, they automatically put me in like the business networking category.
Okay.
So it'll automatically say like, hey, what do you want to contribute to this? So it'll say like, what are the best ways to be a thought leader in XYZ, right? So, and then you'll get a badge, like a LinkedIn badge that will say like Davidson Hang, top voice for life coaching, or business networking, for instance, was the most recent one. So you just give insights or like just like a thought leadership on that specific topic, and there's a lot of different prompts. So like let's say you're more into digital marketing or copywriting, right? There's like a category for each of them, and you'll get badges that would just help you stand out.
Right.
So anytime someone goes in your profile, like they see this huge badge, it's like, oh, LinkedIn top voice, and it just gives you credibility. So that's a brand new, they just rolled that out a month ago.
That's funny because you mentioned that, and I got some of these messages and I thought it was spam at first. And I've actually tagged them because I'm like, I realized it was from an actual LinkedIn employee. I'm like, oh, this is actually legit. Maybe I need to learn. I'm glad you're explaining this, because I'm like, what do they want me to do with this exactly? What are they really looking for here? Because it sounds like a good idea, but I'm not really sure how to respond necessarily, right? So you're just saying just write about whatever they're asking for. Is that kind of what the deal is? Because
Yeah, so usually like like using artificial intelligence, they'll classify your profile. For yours,
Right.
like it might be like personal, like finance
Yep.
might be like a category, right?
Right,
Or
right.
or entrepreneurship might be another category for you.
Yeah, it was a pretty specific question, is my recollection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, it's very specific, right?
Yeah.
So you just, and if you get into it earlier, that's even better because
Okay.
like you have one of the earlier ones, you'll get more likes.
Okay.
And then if you write enough articles and people are upvoting it, like people are liking
Okay.
it or hearting it or they're celebrating it, which is like the clapping sign.
Right.
After a while, like maybe you do it for 2 weeks, you'll get a badge, and then that'll last for 90.
okay.
Like it'll last for a certain amount of time, like
Oh,
60
really?
or 90 days.
Really? It's a decent amount of time.
Yeah. So I was able to get one for sales management was a topic. So, but it just looks cool, right? And then you can kind of post like, hey, I'm proud of myself. Like I was able to get this, and then people will like it, and people, because LinkedIn's all about like
Sure.
that aspect of it too, right? It's like people like it because they want the networking component to it.
And I would, and I don't know, I would think that their algorithm is now going to actually connect you to more people, kind of like a YouTube or a Facebook or any other, right?
That's what they're trying to do.
So if you have more like value, because I know the whole YouTube thing now is basically make really, really good content that people actually want to watch, and we will spread the word. It's kind of like, don't try to don't try to trick us. Just do good stuff that people actually want to see.
Yeah.
And so, which is really what it should be, right? But apparently they're getting pretty good at analyzing actual good content, right? That's my understanding, right?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, I think, is trying to copy a similar format. So that's why they do that, because they want to build communities around specific like thought leadership.
Right.
So for instance, like I recently have been writing about Tony Robbins a lot.
Yeah.
So I'll get other Tony Robbins fans that will just like my stuff. I'm like, oh, I don't even know how this guy found me. But I think because I'm writing about Tony Robbins, it's showing up on his newsfeed. Other Tony fans.
That's awesome. There's a lot of those out there. All right, we're going to take another quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I'm here with Davidson Hong, and we're having a lot of fun here, and I'm learning a lot. LinkedIn and the YouTube thing I think is great, and that's really taken off a lot. And just before we sat down, you told me something I didn't know when I met you at the chamber event. You're now on your own, right? You're now a YouTube influencer officially, because this is now your primary income, which is amazing. So can you walk us through a little bit about that? Because as we all know, well, I don't know if we all know this, but people are like, oh, I'm going to go and be an YouTube influencer, and you hear about these people making like buku bucks and all this money, and I'm going to retire in 2 weeks, and it's all done. Well, you've been doing this for 10 years, first of all, and you're pretty good at it. And it's a process, obviously, right? So take us through a little bit of that process, and then you said, hey, now I feel pretty comfortable. Tell us kind of what you have that you feel like, hey, this is going to continue to work for me, right? And I can take that leap kind of out on my own, so to speak.
That's a great question. I think it's crazy because I remember seeing a stat where like kids nowadays, like the number one thing that they want to be is like a YouTuber is like is up there, which is crazy, right? Because back when we were younger, it was like astronaut or like something else, right? Something different,
right?
So it is interesting to see how much influence YouTubers have now. Like Mr. Beast, I would argue, has more influence than probably most celebrities, right? At this point,
I would
right?
agree.
Yeah. So, it is scary because there's like less of a playbook on like what happens, right?
Right.
Like, it's not like, oh, I get my CPA or get my CFA level 1, 2, 3, right? It's
right.
Like that's a little bit more clear. I think, and people don't know this, but a lot of YouTubers make actually most of their money outside of the YouTube. So like, let's say they're making 185,000 on YouTube. Do selling courses, whether it's a copywriting course, whether it's video editing course, that's where they're making like 600, 700,000, right? So for me, it would be the YouTube would funnel into my self-development courses, like transformation courses, right? So, and how I was able to come up to that realization, have the confidence, like, hey, like, how can I give up like a stable job where I was making like on average, like 200K over the last 3 years, right? To like doing something where it's going to be much more unpredictable,
right?
Was because like if I really look back, I'm like, like even in my corporate gig, like everyone kept asking me to do workshops like at LinkedIn or at all the companies I was at, and it was always like team bonding exercises. It was like life coaching exercises. And I was like, okay, so even when I was at LinkedIn, all of my time was spent doing like DE&I stuff or social impact stuff, like fundraising for charities or social chair at LinkedIn, right? And it was like me coordinating things with like Google and Amazon and Spotify and all their ERGs, which is like the Asian groups that I was a part of. And I'm like looking back at it, I'm like, like I actually only spent like maybe 15 hours a week doing like my actual job, which was sales, and the other 25 hours were actually doing all these other leadership development related things. So I'm like, I should probably just like double down on that and actually like have faith and trust in myself.
I'm assuming you enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, so much more. Yeah, so much more than I did sales, and that was like the hardest breakthrough, right? Because I've been in sales for like 18 years, so I'm like, it was just part of my identity. So I didn't realize like, I thought that's what I'm known for, but it's actually when I take a step back, it was like, no, like every time someone calls me, it was always life coaching related, like, oh, I'm going through a divorce, or I'm thinking about, or my wife just beat the crap out of me, and it was all like life related things. It was never like, hey, Davidson, I'm trying to make 300K this year. Like people don't usually reach out to me on those types of topics. Although sometimes they do because but it's rare. Like I would say it was more of like, hey, like I'm thinking about starting a YouTube channel, or I'm thinking about like publishing a book or things like that.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing here is like you're learning through the process, the feedback from like what people are needing, and you're providing that service, quote, to the hero, right? You're like the Yoda, like what things are you good at actually helping people with, and they're responding to, and the people that you connect with, right? So I think you're guiding these people, and I think you found kind of your following and your group and your tribe, so to speak, right? So you've kind of found your people, and you're like, hey, they really need me, and I can provide these services in a way that we really connect, and I can benefit them. And I think part of that was really the kind of, it sounds like that feedback from them. And you kind of identified with that. So here's a new problem I have, right? Like my wife's beating me, or whatever the case is, right?
Yeah.
I can identify with the issues that you're having, and I can help you get through that because I was at that place many, many years ago, and I can help you, get to the other side. Because most of these things in life, hopefully, if we understand them, we can get through to the other side. But when you're living it, it's traumatic. When it's kind of in the rear view mirror, you can say, oh, now I can reanalyze this thing and say, all right, how did I actually get through this?
Right.
Because at the time, you're kind of like overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it's always good to have that guide out there saying, okay, well, here's how we get you to that next place, right? And you seem to have become very good at that. That's what I'm seeing, at least.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, right? Because this is a show about finances, right? But every time I made more money, I thought it would make me happier, but actually didn't necessarily make me happier,
Yeah, that's a common misunderstanding. People that earn the issue that people have sometimes is they go out, their goal is to make more money.
Yep.
Right? They go, I want to make more money. I have a number. You hear about the number. What's your number? How much you need to make? X, 300,000, 500,000, $1 million a year, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at money as how do I want to provide the most impact in an area that matters to me, what happens is the money follows you. Look at all of the wealthiest people out there now, right? What is Elon Musk? What is he actually after? Right? What does he want to do? He doesn't want to make electric cars. He doesn't want to launch rockets. Elon wants to go to Mars.
Yeah.
And everything that he does is focused around the impact about how he wants to save civilization by about learning how to do something that's literally at the moment impossible. So everything that he does is focused on his impact. And that's what drives him. It's not the money. The money has nothing to do with what he's trying to do. That's the vehicle. So wealthy people, the ones that are happiest, are really focused on how am I impacting, or how am I using my financial capabilities to maximize impact. And the more I do that, the better I feel about myself. So in your case, you'd say, hey, what do I need? What do I really want to do to help in a way that matters most to me? What matters most to me? How can I do that? And you can use your resources to accelerate that. And when you put it in that perspective, now the money is a tool to help you with the impact. Money in of itself is worthless, frankly. It's what are you doing with it, and how are you affecting things that matter to you? That's what really needs to happen. And that's the thing that I love working with wealthy people about, is because a lot of times business owners will get into this like vicious cycle where like they create businesses they're actually not happy about, where they make a lot of money but don't enjoy it. That's because they're probably not impacting the people they care about in the way that they care.
Yeah.
And actually, Russell Brunson talked about this once. He built this business to the point where he said, I was miserable because I hated my clients. He goes, I wish I was an employee so that my employer would fire me so I could go off and find another job. And then what he did is he realized, who do I really want to impact? In his case, he likes to help entrepreneurs leverage, the internet to have their impact, right? So once he realized who he loves to work with, he literally changed his whole business process. And now he never wants to retire because he's like, he won't even sell the business because I enjoy doing this too much.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
that.
really how you have to design your business career. It has to really align with what you care about and how you want to impact the world long term.
That's awesome. You don't hear too many CFPs, no offense to other CFPs, like say this,
Yeah,
right?
well, that's what I work. That's my personal view. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great to have people like yourself, right? Because obviously, other people like you gotta take care of the family. You have, you know what I mean? Like there's obligations. But that's cool. It sounds like you
Well, that's kind of the given. I mean, the problem is many, I don't want to get too, while on your subject, but I mean, the problem is many are really like investment advisors are not actually wealth management, helping people to really put their life in perspective in a way that makes them happier and actually adds more impact to what they're trying to do long term. They're really saying, well, here was your return this year and all that. I mean, that's all fine. That's important. And that's a piece of what you do. But that's not really the conversation that the wealthy have. They want to be healthy. They want to have impact. They have goals well beyond the money. And that's what you really have to address, frankly. So anyway.
That's awesome. Yeah, very holistic.
Yeah.
It's refreshing to see that.
Yep.
Because like to your point, I mean, every industry has like a couple bad apples that ruin it for everyone. So that's refreshing to hear that. Like, are people like yourself that are actually
We do exist. Absolutely.
like holistic, like more
Absolutely.
holistic take and less about like like S&P 500 and all. I mean, which is like a vehicle, right? But it's like, it sounds like you're looking.
Well, that's just a commodity that you have to plug in to get the goal. But yeah, so I mean, but now that you're out on your own, I mean, we'll have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure we get this. But now that you're out on your own, so what have you done what are you doing next? What's your goal now? What is your impact?
Yeah. So
what are you headed for? What are you going for now?
I've created this like 52-week mastermind program because I spent $150,000 traveling the world doing all these seminars. I'm like, oh, I like that about that. I like this about Tony. I like this about all these conferences, and making it into like a more holistic program that addresses everything instead of like, I feel like certain programs only address like the mental or the physical or the health, but I haven't seen anything that's like totally comprehensive, like the whole being. So that's my exciting new course that I'm launching.
That's awesome. I can't wait to learn about it. You're listening to Master Your Finance. You go to subscribe at masteryourfinances.us. And thank you very much for listening.